Planning an entire campaign might seem like a daunting task, but you don't have to plot out every detail right from the start. You can start with the basics, running a few adventures, and think about larger plot lines you want to explore as the campaign progresses. You're free to add as much or as little detail as you wish. Huh. That's really good advice, but I've got a couple other ideas. Welcome to Geek Philosophy, where we explore our love of geeky wisdom. We release new videos weekly, so please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss out on any of the content. My name's Brian, and I appreciate you joining me as we explore planning an entire multi-session D&D campaign. Kinda? Before we jump in, I want to mention that this campaign planning method was adapted from Deborah Chester's book, The Fantasy Fiction Formula. It's an excellent book, and it focuses on fiction writing, but several of the concepts can be modified and leveraged for use in a D&D campaign. And like I said in the intro, the advice provided in the Dungeon Master Guide is a great starting point. But today, I'm going to cover a few specific aspects of campaign planning from my own point of view. I'll be discussing how I draft the campaign story question and use a campaign story planner. And I'll also include information about NPCs and important locations. And I could do an entire video on each of these topics, and I actually might, but this should provide you with a good starting point to plan your next multi-session campaign. Okay, the first step is to write your campaign's story question. If you've already established a campaign theme or written an entire description for the campaign you'd like to run for your players, then you're ahead of the game. Pun intended. But if you haven't, check out the How to Develop Your D&D Campaign's Theme video for more details on this process. It's important to note that a campaign story question is different from that campaign description I mentioned earlier. Campaign descriptions are for the players, and campaign story questions are for you as the DM. By simply applying the sentence structure of the story question, you'll have a specific goal for your campaign without railroading your players along the way. The campaign story question follows the following format. When something happens, the player characters pursue a goal. But will they succeed when the antagonist provides opposition? Okay, this is going to make much more sense and be clearer if we fill in the blanks and I give you some actual examples. So let's see what we can come up with. When the undead begin to rise, the player characters endeavor to put an end to the devastation, but will they survive before the necromancer increases her power by finding the orb of chaos? Or maybe when the heir to the throne is kidnapped, the player characters accept the quest to recover him, but will they succeed when the king works secretly to hide his son from the world? Or even when arcane magic begins to fail throughout the land, the player characters seek out an explanation and resolution, but will they succeed before the high priest completes the final ritual to rid the world of arcane spellcraft? Each of these examples uses the same campaign story question, but they offer different versions of campaigns, so I kind of like the last one, and I'll continue with it as we move forward. For me, a plan for a homebrew campaign is sort of a living document. It's different from a published campaign where everything has already been laid out in advance and you just have to adapt it along the way. Nothing wrong with that, but with this method, you create everything along the way. Sure, you'll have to adjust as you go, but the idea is that you don't actually write out the entire campaign from the start. You put together a basic framework, a basic structure, and then let it develop as you and the players have a great time crafting the story. So we've got our story question, and this campaign story question is just for me, or for you, depending as the DM. And it's just so I can focus on the intent of the campaign. But I'll craft a campaign description to go along with it. And this gives the players a glimpse of what they're getting into without really giving everything away. So here's a campaign description for the players. The Curse of the Arcane. Since the end of the ruined war, Ventus has become a continent of peaceful collaboration between nations. But recently, there have been rumors of a second weeping, one that is happening slowly throughout the land and threatens all who tap into the power of the arcane. Okay, I'm liking it so far, gotta say. And now that we've got those two covered, I want to call attention to a great piece of advice from the Dungeon Master Guide. Start small. Crafting the initial adventure is not only a great way to set the story into motion, but it'll also let you adjust to things on the fly. But I also think it's important to have a good idea of what the campaign climax should be. So starting with the end in mind is a key point to foreshadowing and laying clues along the way, especially if it's a mystery campaign. So let's take a brief look at my plan for the first encounter. It's a social encounter, and the PCs enter a town and notice that there's a group of traveling entertainers performing for the people. So they promise a demonstration of arcane delights, or a magic show, but during the performance, the spells fail, and so does the applause. And through this encounter, the PCs can learn that the arcane magic is beginning to fail. And while the players with arcane spellcasting characters haven't yet experienced this with their own abilities, they're warned. It may happen to them too. Okay, now we're cooking. I like the idea of starting off with tension right from the start. This isn't just world tension, this is player and PC tension because they have to worry that something might happen to them, the same thing. I mean, a wizard without the ability to even cast a cantrip? Huh? Now, that can be annoying if you just start out with that, but if you slowly introduce that spells fade over time or something's going on, we have a starting point. So now let's look at what the campaign climax is going to be. Campaign climax is PCs try to stop the final ritual. That's it. That's all the planning I can do. I need to actually have a couple of games and see how things progress. But that said, I'll likely just plan for my first session. I'll start with that encounter, fill in some of the others, and then, see how things go. Since I have an idea of the first and last gaming sessions, I'll likely be able to plan out the NPCs and monsters that will be making an appearance in those games. Some obvious PCs that I need for that first social encounter are the performers, especially the ones with spellcasting. So it's important to plan them out in a little bit more detail, but there will also be some key members in the town that I can flesh out a little bit, maybe the mayor or a shopkeeper or two. I'll write down a few basic names and descriptions and character traits and have them for other townspeople that I can pull together just on the fly as things go. They want to go talk to someone, I pull a name and the characteristics and I put something together and there we go. For the campaign climax, I probably need to go ahead and write down who the high priest is. Maybe even decide if they're a member of an established church or if they're a well-known zealot. But I can change that on the fly when I need to, as long as it makes sense. The big thing is, if I reveal something to the players, it officially becomes part of the story. Don't change it again from there. And by taking this approach, you are building NPCs as you need them. And if you bring them back, they're now recurring NPCs. They can be PC favorites or mid-level bad guys that got away and come back to cause problems later. So don't try to force your NPCs. The ones that are popular will become popular on their own. Things will develop over time, I promise. And even if you did kind of plan for this recurring NPC that is always going to be charming, they may hate that one and it just doesn't work for the game. Please remember, I'm adapting from fiction writing because I'm not writing a novel here. Everybody at the table is contributing to this story. And so I can't force a character. I have to see how things work throughout the game. And a character that I had planned for multi-sessions may only be around for one. And somebody that I planned for this one little stable boy character, he may be the NPC that recurs throughout the entire campaign just because maybe the random characteristic that I pulled just caught on, and if I was doing voices, the voice that I did was just a favorite and they just really like that one, which can help me later because man, what a deep and meaningful thing if that person gets kidnapped or turned by whoever this is that is making things move behind the scenes or whatever I need to do. In other words, don't lock yourself in. There are also some great supplements and references that make NPCs even easier to come up with. The Game Master's Book of Non-Player Characters by Jeff Ashworth is a great resource from a third-party publisher that you should definitely check out. It's completely 5e compatible and there are hundreds of characters in it. The great thing about this particular book is it divides NPCs into 4 main sections organized by environment. So You've got NPCs for big cities, small towns, remote outposts, and the realm underground. And each of these are broken down further into subcategories, making it really easy to find the right NPC for your session. And this just scratches the surface of the content in this book. And no, I am not currently an affiliate, and no, they aren't currently a sponsor. I just find it useful and I highly recommend it. So no matter what other resource you prefer, the point is give yourself a break. You don't have to have every NPC planned from the beginning or even create all of them yourself from scratch. Just take it one step at a time. So you need to have a place for your encounters to happen, right? So you need some detailed locations created, right? Well, yes and no. You need enough information to run the session you're currently playing, plus a little extra. And the amount of that a little extra will depend on if you're running things on your own world or if you're using an established setting. Like if you're playing in Forgotten Realms or Tal'Dorei, you're going to need to know a little bit more. But if it's your own world, you can detail locations on a session-by-session basis, having some basic notes of the surrounding areas of where they are and the homelands of the PCs, because if your player characters are from somewhere else, you should know about those places too. But then build out the world as you play. The beauty of this is that players are inevitably part of the world creation process. Their questions and their interests will spark creativity and planning. For established settings that I mentioned, and there's a bunch of them, you could read up on anywhere you plan to hold your campaign. And you don't have to be the expert on every part of that campaign world, but you should have a good idea of anywhere that you're asking your players to visit or explore during the game. To see how I put some of this into practice, you may want to check out our live stream campaign that will be starting very soon, or it has already started depending on when you're watching this. Thanks for sticking with me while I contemplated planning a D&D campaign. For this week's quote, I turned to Dean Winchester from Supernatural with a great reminder for all DMs who are starting a campaign. Don't forget the pie!